Satan's post-Diluvian attack on human freedom, the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:1-9. The devil's second major counterattack focused entirely upon the issue of human freedom. For Satan was and is well aware that, short of destroying the human race, outright or through genetic pollution, the best way to stop mankind from turning to God is to compromise our ability, our freedom to do so. The Tower of Babel incident occurred no later than 100 years after the Great Flood, as we know from the naming of Peleg. By this time, the family of Noah had expanded rapidly. The descriptions given in Genesis chapters 10 and 11 paint a picture of a post-flood population boom, progressing at a pace beyond anything the world had yet seen, a fact no doubt attributable, at least in part, to the decreasing lifespan and consequent shortening of generational intervals. As in the pre-flood world, this expansion of population was apparently accompanied by concomitant advances in technology and civilization. Compare the urbanization of Genesis 10:10-12, and by a concomitant decline in the general level of interest in and concern for God. Thus is it ever so. It was not long after this process had gathered momentum that Satan launched his next major counterattack, inspiring the premier political leader of that day, Nimrod, to fuse this growing population into a united, one-world society. Such a development, still somewhat inconceivable in today's multicultural world, would provide tremendous advantages for the devil's objective of turning mankind away from God. A highly cooperative, highly homogenized, highly centralized society need only be shifted in a godless direction once. For once the worship of the only true God is deemed antisocial and made illegal. It becomes an easy matter to discourage it entirely under such circumstances, especially in the absence of any alternative society on the face of the earth, where religious dissidents who had chosen for God might find refuge. One cannot therefore imagine a more ideal scenario for the devil's squelching of faith than to bring about a single unified top-down state in charge of all human affairs on earth. For from this beginning it would be but a short step to eradicating all faith on earth by taking away the freedom of those who might choose to exercise such faith. That Nimrod was the human genius behind this satanic plan is evident from a comparison of Genesis 10:8-12 with the account of the Tower of Babel at Genesis 11:1-9. First, the tower is built in the very place of Nimrod's initial urban power base, the plain of Shinar, that is Babylonia, Genesis 10:10 and 11:2. Since this is the one place where all humanity is concentrated in the century following the flood, his supremacy in creating a political and urban structure for the rapidly expanding human race cannot be ignored. Secondly, Nimrod is the only major political figure distinguished in Scripture, operating at the time of the division of the earth, Genesis 10:8-12. He is the grandson of Ham through Cush, while Peleg, the great-grandson of Shem through Arphaxad and Eber, saw the earth divided in his days. Assuming roughly equivalent generations, Nimrod would have been older than Peleg, and could thus have been in a position to foment the building of the tower by the time of Peleg's birth. And as the builder of the most important cities of his day, it seems impossible that any such worldwide cooperative activity, such as the construction of this infamous tower, would have been possible without his approval and support. Thirdly, Nimrod is singled out by the Bible for his active hostility toward God at this time. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. It was this Nimrod who became the first mighty one, that is, famous and prominent individual, on the earth after the flood. In particular, he was mighty at hunting men in opposition to the Lord. For this reason we have the proverb to be like Nimrod, mighty at hunting men in opposition to the Lord. Genesis 10:8 and 9. Nimrod is the first to be called Gibbor since the destruction of the Nephilim, Genesis 6:4. A fact also emphasized in the genealogy of 1 Chronicles 1:10. The word Gibbor means mighty not only in terms of physical strength, but also in the sense of fame or prominence in other areas as well. The Nephilim, it will be recalled, were apparently gifted with any manner of human talents and abilities, and were possessed of almost overwhelming attractiveness. In a similar way, Nimrod was not a Gibbor child, that is, a mighty man of valor, talented as a warrior, the most common application of the word in the Hebrew Old Testament. Rather, Nimrod's prominence lay in the sphere of political persuasion, and that is why the verses quoted carefully spell out the area of his mightiness, namely, hunting men against God. That the hunting here referred to does not pertain to the taking of animals for sport is plain to see. God's covenant with Noah after the flood authorized the use of animals for food, Genesis 9:3, save only that the blood, a symbol of life in general and the work of Christ in particular, had to be drained off in a specific way, Genesis 9:4. There is thus no reason that literal hunting should be in any way against God, the meaning of the preposition lifni here, as indicated by his success in organizing the growing population of the earth into cities, initially Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, all on the plain of Shinar, Genesis 10:10. Nimrod's amazing talent lay in his ability to persuade men to follow him, to hunt and capture their hearts, similar to the way in which Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel as a first step in fomenting rebellion against his father David. 2 Samuel 15:6. Fishers of men is the righteous antithesis, Mark 1:17. This ensnaring of his fellow's will was clearly against God, as the sequel shows, and it is more often the case than not that, where political mass movements are concerned, their entire purpose and foundation are, when stripped of all facade, anti-God in the extreme. Fourthly, the very name Nimrod means in Hebrew, "let us revolt." We may surmise, therefore, that Nimrod was not this individual's original name, but that it was changed, as so often was the case in Old Testament times, to reflect the crowning characteristic of his personality, as well as the most significant event of his career. The rallying cry that became the name by which history knows him, that is Nimrod, is reminiscent of the similar call to arms that will be raised by the leaders of the final revolt against God, the Gog-Magog rebellion, Revelation 20:7-9. Why are the nations forming into a mob, and the peoples of the earth grumbling idly? The kings of the earth are assembling, and its princes are gathering together against the Lord and his anointed one, saying, "Let us pull off their chains and cast their cords from us." Psalm 2:1-3. Finally, Nimrod's career is clearly split into two phases in Genesis 10:10-12. The second phase, directed not at the plain of Shinar, where all of mankind was concentrated in the century after the flood, but to the more northerly climes of Assyria, must reflect God's frustration of Nimrod's original, more grandiose scheme. Following the defeat of his attempt to forge all humanity into one indivisible whole, Nimrod continued to put his special talents to work in the north. The ambitious agenda of creating a single worldwide state capable of retaining its hold upon the growing population of the earth required more than an individual of preeminent political abilities. It required a rallying point, a unifying symbol that would at once capture the imagination of the post-Diluvian world, while at the same time providing sufficient motivation for collective action. In the selection of the famed Tower of Babel, Nimrod, unquestionably under the careful guidance of the devil, chose just such a symbol. This massive and impressive construction project could not help but be the universal subject of conversation in the unicultural, unilingual world of that time. Like the Ark, it was unique and, to this point, completely unprecedented. Unlike the Ark, however, which had after all been commissioned by God as a sign of impending judgment, as well as a vehicle of deliverance from that judgment, the Tower of Babel was not only not of God, but was instead decidedly anti-God. This is true for a number of reasons. First, the main objective sought by Nimrod and his diabolical master, in the pursuit of this project, was to parlay the universal cooperative effort of the tower's construction into a future, enforced, unanimity of action on the part of all mankind. Once the precedent had been set, and sufficient time had passed in such a unified all-out effort, the roots of a monolithic world state would have been firmly set. Compare the securing of the Roman Empire through the lengthy reign of Augustus. It would have been a short step for Nimrod and his cadre of sub-leaders from overseeing this lengthy, all-consuming construction project to assuming complete political control. Secondly, based upon the use to which similar structures were put in later times, specifically the ziggurats, celestial worship, the worship of demons in place of the true God, was undoubtedly a major hidden purpose in the tower's construction, for the symbolism of a tower reaching into the heavens clearly betokens an attempt to make contact with the gods. After political unification had been cemented, the symbolic centerpiece of the new collective would be used for pagan religious activity. This pagan devil worship would, as in later times in Babylonia, be a mandatory part of life in the new society, and as this would be the only society on earth, all true spirituality would forever be fatally compromised. Now at this time, a century or more after the flood, the entire world spoke a single language and had identical customs. And it so happened that in their expansion eastward, they found a favorable valley in the land of Shinar, that is, Babylonia, and took up residence there. And they began to say, every man to his friend, "Come, let's make bricks and fire them." Now these bricks they used in place of dressed stone, and they used tar in place of mortar. Then they began to say, "Come, let's build a city for ourselves, and a tower whose top will reach to the heavens. That way we can establish our identity and not be scattered over the face of the entire earth." Genesis 11:1-4. The specific description in Genesis 11:4 of the popular movement to build the Tower of Babel is the best testament we have to the uncannily persuasive powers of Nimrod. For the budding population of earth has taken his words and plans as their own, "Let us build." Now clearly, this focused idea did not spring into the minds of the human family en masse of its own accord. It must have originated with someone, and the sole individual of the period reported by the Bible to be actively involved in the promotion of urbanization before and after the tower incident is Nimrod, who plainly found a way to further this plan on a grassroots level, and thus be in a position to cast himself in the role of a humble facilitator of the popular will rather than of a high-profile dictator. Another interesting point about his strategy to be gleaned from the narrative is the fact that the campaign to found Babel and build the tower was advanced very much in the manner of similar politically correct, good-covered evil schemes of our own day. Part of the population bought the idea immediately, then began to coerce their more reluctant neighbors to take part, and they began to say, every man to his friend, indicating that peer pressure has always been an important element in political persuasion. Furthermore, the plan did not start with the tower, the most clearly anti-God element of Nimrod's design. First, collective action in general construction is secured. Let us make bricks. Second, in a classic bait-and-switch maneuver, the construction of a city is put forward as a worthy construction objective, with the tower, the real focus of the operation, disguised as a subordinate afterthought. We can see how the promise of a large urban center would have appealed to the post-flood generation, who had been a strictly rural civilization before Nimrod came on the scene, but who had doubtless heard about the antediluvian cities and would only naturally be desirous of reduplicating such inventions. Genesis 4:17. Now cities and urbanization, like technology, are not evil in and of themselves. But as with many things in life, that which is allowable is not always beneficial to our spirituality. 1 Corinthians 6:12 and 10:23. Many things in life by their very nature bring with them increased potential for temptation and turning away from God. And because of the diversity of our sin natures, these things often differ from person to person. As the sequel shows, the building of Babel did in fact have terrible spiritual consequences for the reasons previously addressed. Third, for those who were not fooled about the importance of the tower in the plan to build Babel, and who had the character to resist the intense peer pressure to join in this whole world effort, Nimrod provided an attractive incentive and rationale for the need to construct such an edifice without the tower. So the claim went, the heritage and history of the human family would be lost. Unless some extraordinary step were taken, their identity as a distinct people would be obliterated by the passage of time and by the rapid growth and dispersal of a population that by and large had not even second-hand knowledge of the pre-flood civilization. Thus Nimrod's appeal also played craftily upon the common human tendency to wish to preserve its roots, a characteristic no doubt all the more open to exploitation on account of the recent memory of the worldwide flood which had eradicated every tangible trace of the antediluvian civilization. Lost in the enthusiasm of the moment, by all but the unnamed, unsung faithful few, was the fact that this attitude, let alone this act of creating a monument to themselves, flew in the face of any true faith in God. He is our Father, and our names are known forever by Him. Isaiah 56:5 and Revelation 2:17. We are written in his book, Daniel 12:1 and Philippians 4:3. Everything on this earth is dust, destined for destruction, 1 Peter 4:7 and 2 Peter 3:12. And the idea of preserving ourselves through preserving our name is a fatal vanity. The Tower of Babel, therefore, in addition to providing a framework whereby all future generations could be influenced and coerced into ignoring God, was essentially a monument of anti-faith, for its express purpose was to do what only God can do, that is, preserve human life and identity forever, and its very building a blasphemous statement to the effect that God could not or would not do so. The Tower of Babel was thus a complete rejection of faith in the covenant made by God with Noah, wherein he pledged never to wipe out mankind again, replacing as it did the amazing rainbow of promise with a man-made edifice of dirt.